I would like to show you a few photos and introduce you to some of my friends. First, we'll start with this photo. I'm the tired-looking teenager. The man on the right is Congressman Howard C. Nilsen. This is a photo of George Murray. He's posing with a family member in front of a home his widowed mother owned. This photo probably dates to the 1970s. Next, I want you to meet Bart. Here's Bart in his office, and his wife Shanna right here in her kitchen. This is Don Ray. He made a special trip into the house to get his baseball cap before we snapped the photo, simply because he knew it would tick off some of his grandchildren. He's kind of smart aleck. And this is Cheryl. I've just introduced you to some of my favorite friends and neighbors who have let me help them record their family stories and personal memoirs. We like to say a picture is worth 1,000 words, and that's often true, but what if the photo still doesn't give us enough information? That's where a story comes in. Let's back up a bit while I tell you the story behind each of these photos, and as I do, I'd like you to be thinking a little bit about the before and the after. What changes for you after you hear the story that is connected to the photo? The rest of the story of this autographed portrait is that I was an awkward teenager who had never even been on a plane. But I won a speech contest. The grand prize was an expense-paid trip to Washington, D.C. As part of that trip, I was taken to meet some of the congressional delegation members from my home state. When I walked into Congressman Nilsen's office, his receptionist, whom I had never met, stood up and threw her arms around me and said the congressman had been waiting for me. Congressman Nilsen welcomed me into his office and said, "You are Harold Whiting's granddaughter. He let me know you would be coming." Well, this was a giant surprise to me. Congressman Nilsen had actually arranged for a photographer to meet us, and I think you can see some of the confusion in my face as I pose while this photographer snapped this photo. The formalities over, he turned to me and reminded me that my grandfather Harold had been a member of the state legislature of my state, and the two men had been colleagues. Then Congressman Nilsen uttered one sentence that I still remember 40 years later. He said, "I have always worked to get your grandfather's political endorsement when I'm campaigning because people trust Harold's judgment." Story number 2. Denny Murray went through a difficult divorce when he was in his 60s. Subsequently, his ex-wife disposed of all the family photographs, including every photo from Denny's childhood, effectively erasing the photographic record of the first 60 years of Denny's life. No photos of his childhood and very few of his adulthood remain. One day, during an interview for his personal history, Denny and I found this photo of his Uncle George on a genealogical website. It had been uploaded by a distant family member. Denny told me a story about Uncle George. He said, "Uncle George had an apple orchard, and he always hired local Native Americans to come in and pick apples. I was always there with them. I had to pick the apples like anybody else. One day, Uncle George and the old chief got together, and the old chief said, 'You know, that's a good worker. I'd like him to be my boy.' Uncle George said, 'Well, what would you give me for that boy?' And the chief reached in his pocket and pulled out a pocket knife and said, 'This pocket knife is worth a lot of money. What would you do?' And Uncle George said, 'I'll take the pocket knife.' So I, meaning Denny, was sent off with the chief for one night. I was about 7 years old, and I was scared to death. The next day we came back, and Uncle George returned the pocket knife. I think they set it up just to pull a trick on me. Denny doesn't have many photos, but he does have memory. Photographs have powerful memory prompting capabilities, and often reminiscing can be therapeutic. Here's a photo of Denny as he looks today, standing on top of the paved-over lateral canal where he and his friends liked to swim in the summertime when they were boys. The girls liked to steal our clothes, and we had to bike home naked, he says. Not all of the photos of Denny are gone. There is still time to capture a few more. Here's Bart again in his study. When Bart was a child, his parents would often ask him, "Bart, have you done your thinking yet today?" It inspired a habit that continues, and over the years, thoughts that started as ideas have morphed into research, scientific papers, patents, and more. Pointing to a pile of papers next to his chair, Bart insists that they are carefully organized and stacked. "You can't file good papers. If you put them away, they are gone, and you won't remember what you need to do," he asserts. The potential leverage of the ideas and inventions of this single stack is mind-boggling. Shanna's photo tells another lovable story. Wanting to create a Christmas tradition that would allow her to have individual time with each of her 45 grandchildren, Shanna devised a tradition called Bread Bears. At Christmas time, each of her grandchildren over the age of 3 gets to have a one-on-one date with Grandma. They shape their own hunk of bread dough into a teddy bear or other shapes, and then while the bread raises, they play a game of crokinole. Shanna says, I usually win, so I can trash talk all I want, and it makes them all the more determined to beat me. Very few of them ever have. The day ends with a photo of Grandma and the grandchild together with that year's bread sculpture, and then each grandchild chooses an ornament from the Christmas tree to take home. Behind Don Ray in his garage is his beloved 1968 Mustang convertible and some potted plants that he tends all through the cold winter months. The plants are bird of paradise, a tropical flower. On the day that he proposed to his wife Nedra, he put a diamond engagement ring on the beak of that bird of paradise corsage that he had bought her for the junior prom. He had chosen a bird of paradise because he wanted her flower to stand out and be different from all the other girls. Nedra wasn't sure what to think of that ring. Don Ray said, she kind of gave it back. So I hung it on the gold chain that I kept my football letter on and hung that over the rearview mirror on my Mustang where it would swing back and forth as we were driving down the street. It wasn't long before she took it back for safekeeping. They have been married for 71 years. Cheryl contracted polio at age 3, and despite medical care and several surgeries over the years, she's always struggled with weakness in her left leg. She has never told her grandchildren that she had polio as a child. She has never wanted to complain to them about the difficulties of her childhood. Still, she says she hopes there's hiking in heaven. She writes, my son Stephen often takes me on rides to many of the beautiful places in our mountains. He shot this picture of me on the edge of a cliff overlooking these mountains. I love this picture because it represents that we can still feel courageous even though we are older. There are no seen barricades, and so to me, it represents freedom. With only a few sentences, I hope you can see how we brought a little bit of life to each of these photos and developed the personalities of the people in them simply by documenting the story that prompted the photograph in the first place. The purpose of today's class is really very basic. My goal today is to encourage you to begin to do the work of finding 50 great photos of yourself to preserve for your posterity. Why only 50 photos? Well, I want to explain. I am a person who understands kin keeping. I understand the importance of family stories and family traditions. I have read the research that tells us that when grandchildren know their family narrative, they become more resilient. And I've built much of my writing career around the idea that every individual has a story that is important, no matter how boring that person believes themselves to be. As a professional, I understand how critically important it is to the well-being of your grandchildren and your other descendants that you do the work of recording some of your memories. So I was a little shocked when I was working with a photo organizing professional last year to archive some photos of my own grandmother. Her first question was, is Grandma dead? And I thought that was a little harsh, but I said yes. And then she continued, we are not going to digitize one more photo of your grandma until you stop and do your own work. She went on to explain, your grandmother has already done the work to preserve her photos. That's why you had these copies to digitize. But it's a safe bet that the majority of the photos taken of you are not preserved and will not outlive you. Before you spend any more time preserving Grandma's history, we're going to do your work. She told me that the first step would be to gather all of my photos into one place, and then she gave me a list of all the possible nooks and crannies where I would be likely to find photos lurking around in my home. My job was to find a spot where I could gather them all together. I gathered photo albums, framed photographs, negatives, slides, floppy disks, SD cards, several old CDs, computers, cell phones I no longer use, my laptop, boxes and boxes of 4x6 prints that I gathered from the bottoms of drawers and closets. You can imagine how overwhelming this was for me. I know that this work needs to be done, but there are more than 50 years of memories sitting on this desk, and this doesn't include any of my digital photos. At this writing, I had more than 30,000 photographs and videos saved on my smartphone. I take more photos than the average person, but this project was really discouraging to me. And if your blood pressure is rising just listening to this, you can imagine how stressed out I was when I realized that my color engagement photo from the 1980s that I keep on my dresser had deteriorated more than this 100-year-old black and white photo that includes 4 generations of my maternal line, including an image of my third great-grandmother, who was born in 1832. I couldn't take the anxiety, so I put everything back into a closet and decided I would never succeed. And then I realized that this fear, this anxiety of knowing how critical the work is and simultaneously feeling incapable of tackling it, is exactly how my clients feel when they hire me to help them write a personal history. Not only do you need to do the work, but you need to understand a lot of new technologies in order to succeed, and that can feel really, really overwhelming. So let's take a deep breath for a minute, because there is a solution. The solution is in the mindset and in the baby steps. I started by simplifying my goal. I know that the average published personal history has about 100 photographs. 50 are of the individual, and about another 50 include friends and family. So I know that the very first step of a larger publishing project is to find about 50 great photos that span the entire arc of my lifetime from childhood to the present. That feels much more doable. And if I'm really honest with myself, that's about all the photos any of my descendants are going to want to look at anyway. I just want to preserve the very cream of the crop, the very best ones. The most helpful tip my photo organizing guru gave me was to think about sorting my photos literally and figuratively for my digital photos into 4 boxes: A, B, C, and S. The A box includes the album-worthy photos. These are the ones that are probably already sitting in albums and framed photos on my walls in my home. The B box is the box where I put photos that are meaningful to me, but won't matter much to others, like my trip to a national park or my high school reunion photos. I can give my kids permission to dispose of this entire box after I'm gone, but for now, I'm not quite ready to part with them because they include a lot of happy memories. Box C stands for can, meaning trash can. This box is for photos that are blurry, duplicates, and should have been chucked by now. And then box S is the photos that tell a story, even if the photo itself isn't superb. Now all I have to do is look through and get rid of my B box. I only have to worry about looking through my A box and my S box, because somewhere in between these are the photos that I want to take the time to digitize, to print, back up, archive, and preserve. If my clients can get started there and learn how to digitize and preserve just the 50 very best photos, they're well on their way to a larger memoir publishing project, should they choose to undertake one. Okay, if you're still not convinced, I'd like to share one more thought. This is my great-grandmother, Hattie. As far as I know, only about 9 photos of her exist. This particular photo hung over my grandparents' bed, and she kind of freaked me out. She looks so severe. For most of my life, what you see in this photo is all I knew about her. She died due to complications of my grandfather's birth. He was only 13 days old when she passed away. When I was in my 40s, my father unearthed a handwritten document that one of Hattie's sisters had written. It explained that the dress that Hattie is wearing in the photo was her wedding dress. She was an accomplished seamstress and had designed and sewn the dress herself. Here's what Zina wrote about that wedding. The joyous spirit of the evening was climaxed by a dance on the lawn in the moonlight on this crisp but snowless New Year's Eve. It was a sight never to be forgotten as these young people, dressed in their best, rhythmically wove in and out of complicated formations of square dances to the sprightly music of a harmonica played by a talented musician, while his partner called the changes from a vantage point on the porch. How beautiful, graceful, and radiantly happy Hattie seemed as she and Jim formed the center of these dancers. Just a few lines, and now I can actually have a relationship with my great-grandmother. I can understand her as a person. She has a depth and interest to me that she didn't have before I knew that small piece of her forgotten story. Remember that she died when Grandpa Harold was only 13 days old. The portrait I had been so scared of was his only memory of her. It hung over his bed until he passed away in his 80s. You can see the original photo from which Hattie's portrait was taken here. Hattie is on the far left with her entire family, including Zina, standing next to Hattie. It was Zina who wrote the document that shared Hattie's stories and brought her back to life for the generations who never knew her. Once I knew some of Hattie's story, it was as if I had found a piece of myself. This is the power of a story and a photograph. I have shared these stories with you because even though you have no connection with any of these people, you can now look at these photos with new eyes. I have 30,000 photos on my phone, but without some effort on my part, none of them will be accessible to my descendants after my death. And without a few stories connected to a few of my photos, I will be inaccessible to them as well. Without my stories, my photos are only a shell of who I am. And here's something else to think about. Of the 30,000 photos on my phone, almost none of them are of me. The photos of me are on other people's phones. Without conscientious preservation work, they will never be available to my descendants. Now, I'm not a professional photo organizer. I'm a story gatherer. I'm a writer. So while I think preserving and organizing your entire photo library can be really important, I'm not the one to tell you how to do it. There are professionals out there who do organize other people's photos and work at it full time. They can save you hours and hours, and their expertise is worth every penny. But what I can do for you today is introduce you to a couple of easy-to-use technologies. I hope you will begin to use these so that you can preserve a handful of your favorite photos and the stories that go with them. Once you get going on this work, you'll catch the vision. It is not difficult, but it does require intention. And if you happen to be one of those grandparents who lives far away from your grandchildren, or who doesn't have access to them for other difficult reasons, this work is that much more critical. It can become a healing balm. It will help you create the digital breadcrumbs that Erin Larson speaks of so often. You can leave a digital trail for your grandchildren that will tell your story honestly and with love. It will be right there, preserved for them to find when they need it the most. I hope that you will someday publish an entire memoir about yourself, but if writing an entire memoir seems like something that is not possible, or will take too much time, or will cost too much, or because you think you are dull and uninteresting and your life is nothing special, I'd like to show you you are wrong. Preserving a single photo story can be done in only minutes. Your stories do have meaning to your family, and I'll show you 4 simple ways to get started. You can do this work. Let's start with the easiest technology: a pen and a paper and an archive-safe binder. If you have photos of your great-grandparents in some album somewhere, that should be proof enough that this technology can succeed. Choose a photo of yourself. Consider having it professionally reprinted at a professional photo lab as a black and white photograph, since color photos degrade over time. Next, write the story of the photo. Put your story and your photo together in an archival quality storage binder. Label the outside of the binder so your children and grandchildren will know what is inside. When you have a moment, share 1 or 2 of the stories with them. Hopefully their reaction will be motivation to you to keep going. They might even volunteer to help. The one problem with a single photo album is that there's only 1 copy. So be thinking about ways you might share your work with other members of your family. Photos are more likely to survive for a long time if there are duplicate copies backed up and shared with others. A second option is to find a reputable online storage system that allows you to upload a photo and then connect your story to that photo. There are ramifications of putting yourself out there for the world to see, so choose a reputable system that includes encryption and a reasonable expectation that your privacy can be protected. Many of my clients use the Family Search Memories app. Family Search is a free nonprofit website and organization that helps people learn about their family history. It is operated by the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, or LDS Church, and is connected to the church's Family History Department, which is the world's largest genealogical organization. Family Search offers resources through its website, mobile apps, and over 5,000 local family history centers. I'm going to begin by downloading the Family Search Memories app. Next, I'll snap a photograph of my photo as it sits in natural light on a flat surface. I can always choose one from my phone as well. Once my photo is uploaded to the app, I simply click one of the icons to add more information. If I click the microphone icon, I can add an audio recording of my story. So here we go. When I published my first children's book about spider webs and spider silk, I had to hire a photographer to take headshots. I had a really hard time relaxing for the photographer. I didn't calm down and feel like myself until we got out supplies to make spider pizzas, and my little granddaughter wanted to help. Her presence helped me forget all about how awkward I felt. I could just be a grandma as long as I was with her. I read my book to her for the very first time that day. And that's it. You've preserved a photo and the sound of your voice for your posterity. If you want to do a larger photo preserving project, Family Search has 5,000 brick-and-mortar family search centers worldwide. There is probably one within driving distance of where you're living right now. These are typically staffed by volunteers. They will help you make digital copies of your photos using high-speed scanners. It's a great way to preserve your most important photos and documents at no cost. A third option is to record your photos and your stories digitally using the Day One Journal app. So again, you can do this on your phone, on your laptop, on your tablet. The Day One Journal can be uploaded to each, and it synchronizes automatically between all your devices, so it's a great system. And you're going to print copies to share with your family. This application has won multiple awards for its user-friendly interface. I use Day One as my journaling application, but I also use it as the repository for my family stories that just pop into my head on any given day. I have multiple journals, including this one here for my personal history. You'll need a digital copy of the photo you want to record a story about, but that is as simple as snapping a photo of your original photo with your smartphone. Next, I can upload the image to the Day One Journal, and if I'm too lazy to type out the story, I can just use the little microphone option to voice type my story. This is an image of me as a member of my high school drill team from an era when white go-go boots were considered trendy. What is funny about me joining the drill team is that I had no experience as a dancer and no intention of being on the drill team. One of my friends wanted to try out and was too nervous, so I told her, I will try out if you will. The funniest part about this story was that as part of the tryouts, you had to be able to do the splits, and I could not. I had not developed that kind of flexibility yet, so the night before the tryouts, I decided to tie each of my legs to opposite bedposts in my bed, and I slept that way all night. By the next day, I guess my muscles had stretched out enough, and I was able to successfully do the splits in my tryouts. Unfortunately, I made the drill team, and my friend did not. Now that I have that story recorded, I can go back and edit anywhere the artificial intelligence failed to understand me clearly. Then at the end of the year, I can download all the photos and stories I have recorded and request a printed copy from Day One. I can either just download a free PDF, or I can click a few buttons and Day One will send a printed copy of my finished personal history for a nominal fee. There are many great photo preservation sites online. I will share just one of them. I happen to use this one, but it's wise for you to do your own homework and choose one that works best for you. The unique premise at forever.com is that you're actually purchasing photo storage, and part of your payment goes into a fund that works something like a university endowment. The money is invested so that it increases in value and then pays for the recurring maintenance and preservation costs of your forever storage, as well as the migration of your content to new digital formats over time. As I preserve digital copies of my photos on the forever.com website, I can also add my story as part of a detailed description. I can also document the date of a photo. I can also document the date a photo was taken and include other metadata, such as the location of where the photo was taken. In order to make these photos available to my descendants, I'll need to communicate carefully with my family to assure that they have access. I can share individual albums with anyone I choose, and even give them permission to upload additional photos. In terms of privacy, this site may be a good answer for you if you're concerned about the risks of making photos of yourself or your family members available online. Forever data is not sold or used by larger corporations to train artificial intelligence algorithms in the same way larger photo sharing sites use photographic data. And here I should stress that all in the cloud preservation of the digital data should be researched carefully before you upload any images of yourself or your family members. Photos of other people should be uploaded only with their permission. Take time to understand the privacy rules of any resource where you store digital information about yourself. Check their encryption systems and be certain the company is reputable and has policies in place to help protect your privacy. The one thing I have learned from working with my clients is that none of us really wants someone else to be telling our story for us. When I ask whether they would trust their spouse to write down their stories honestly and accurately, even the most devoted husbands and wives laugh at me. No one is going to record your stories the way you would. You want to take control of that process by doing the work yourself, rather than leaving it for someone else to do on your behalf. Now as to the question of why. Why would I put myself through the effort to do this tedious work? Who will even really care, especially if my life is essentially boring? I will take you back to the photo of my great-grandmother Hattie. Again, she died more than 60 years before I was born, but somehow, learning a little bit more about her I felt like a piece of my own identity was restored. I look at her eyes and the shape of her nose, and I realize that I carry some of her DNA with me. And for some reason, that matters to me. We also know from the research that children and young adults who know their family narrative, who have been told the stories of their progenitors, have significantly increased levels of grit and resilience. It's as if knowing that their parents and grandparents went through difficult things and survived, and they know they can get through hard things too. So I encourage you not to gloss over the difficult parts of your life. You can share difficult things with grace. I really like Aaron Marson's definition of grace. We can tell even the most difficult stories about our past with grace. When we show unearned and undeserved kindness to others, we can tell the hard stories without sounding whiny or entitled or bitter and resentful, and our grandchildren need to know that we went through hard things. In writing her personal memoirs, Cheryl has gotten more comfortable with the idea of letting her grandchildren know she suffered from polio, that she had a difficult childhood, and that she had to put herself through hard times by smashing up soybeans to make sandwiches because that's the only food she could afford. She can show them through her stories and her photos that it's possible to climb some mountains. And in the process, she's giving them tangible evidence that they can too. I hope you'll give a similar gift to your own family members. And the final great reason for sharing our stories in this way is that sharing our stories changes the ending. For most of my life, I have thought of myself as not particularly attractive and certainly not photogenic. That was due to this photo. I overheard my mother telling a friend that this photo of me was so poor, even my grandmother refused to hang it on her wall. Well, what my mom meant is that it was truly a terrible bad hair day photo, an awful school photo, not really representative of who I was, but overhearing that gave my little fourth grade heart an unfortunate story. Even my own grandmother didn't like my photo enough to hang it up. So for most of my life, that story that I have told myself has made me the person who stays behind the camera lens. I take hundreds of photos, but I've been pretty cautious about staying out of them myself. When I published my first children's book, I needed headshots. So I had to hire a photographer to take photos of me, and it was extremely unnerving. It wasn't until I looked at those photos and then began a photo gathering project of my own 50 best photos that I realized the story I had been telling myself for my entire life was not necessarily true. Fortunately for me, I had a grandmother who was an amateur photographer, and she captured dozens of photos of me over my lifetime. She could see me for who she really thought I was. And the legacy that she passed on to me through her efforts to be the family storyteller and innkeeper was that I mattered. Even in my most awkward, pre-braces 11-year-old version of myself, that girl knew that my grandma loved me, and that gave me hope. My grandma was beautiful, and that gave me a sense of the possibility that I might someday grow out of my awkward adolescent stage. She took many photos of me, and that gave me confidence. The process of gathering my photos and beginning to write my own photo stories has changed the ending of my story. I can look at the 50 best photos of myself and see that I got some things wrong about myself. Now I work a little harder to make sure that I am in the photos, especially the photos of my grandchildren. I want them to have photographic memories of me and them together. I want them to have visible proof of how much I loved them. I hope you will do this work too and change the ending of your story. Your grandchildren need you to do this for them. Please don't let them down. And while you are still living, get into the photos with them. This can be your precious gift to them so that someday, when they are gathering their 50 best photos, you will be part of their story too. I wish you all the best and happy photo gathering.